5:40. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting. Due to the current COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the newly legislated state government requirements, the 4th of May 2020 Finance Committee meeting will be undertaken as a virtual meeting, conducted using webinar facilities. The council chambers will be closed to members of the public. A link to the Finance Committee meeting for viewing by members of the public will be available via the council website. Recordings of the Finance Committee meeting or parts thereof cannot be copied, recorded, reproduced, reused or transmitted without the prior consent of the General Manager. Council acknowledges that this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Wiradjuri and Gundungurra people and respects the history and culture of the elders both past and present. Page 4, item 2, record of attendance. Councillor McKechnie has applied for a leave of absence due to illness of a family member this evening. Can I have somebody to move that Councillor McKechnie's application for leave of absence be accepted, please? Councillor Kellam, and a second to Councillor McKibben. Thank you. All in favour? Aye. Sorry, thank you. Any declarations of interest this evening, councillors? No declarations of interest. We go on to page 5. Item 0401, Agency Information Guide 2020-21. The recommendation is that the Agency Information Guide 2020-21 be adopted as presented in this report. Can I have someone to move that way, please? Councillor McKibben and Councillor Kellam, thank you. Councillor McKibben, would you like to speak to the report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I've read through the Agency Information Guide. It gives, I think it's a very good generalised guide of the functions that the Council performs and all the other aspects. So I think it's quite informative for people if they're unaware of what we're doing.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kellam.
I would add that I think there are a couple of omissions in there. First one being paragraph 2.1, which doesn't, at least in my copy of the document, it doesn't mention Service New South Wales.
What page are you on, Councillor? Page 11 on the report.
Yep. Of the actual information guide, Madam Mayor, paragraph 2.1, it doesn't actually mention Service New South Wales as a service function of council, and I think it's probably one of the most visible ones. And para 3.2.1, which talks about public meetings, it doesn't mention the Finance and All Works Committee, only the ordinary council meeting.
Right.
And they're only minor, but they're relatively important amendments.
That's page 15, Councillor.
That's correct, page 15.
3.2. Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll go to the Director. These can be included, or are they necessary to be included?
Madam Mayor, yes, I believe that Service New South Wales should be included under function 2.1 of service functions. So I will ensure that that is added. As regard to council meetings, on page 15, the intention of council meetings was for the council ordinary meetings. Would you prefer that I put council ordinary meetings in the title, or that I included the Finance and Works Committees in a separate paragraph?
Okay, I can see what you're saying. I don't personally think that it hurts to have Works and Finance in there. It's we may not have them all the time, but they are committees of the whole of council.
Yes, okay, I will add those. If what, Andrew, Councillor McKibben?
Was there any other comments, councillors, before I go back to Councillor McKibben? Councillor McKibben?
Sorry, Madam Mayor. I'm just mentioning that 323 deals with council committees, as has been specified, but it does say some of these special committees or bodies are. I didn't think it was meant to be an all-inclusive list when I read it. I suppose the Finance Committee is one of those committees, but it tends to, the opening paragraphs under council committees, it says there are also avenues for members of the public to personally participate in the policy development and the functions of the council. Several council committees comprise or include members of the, some of these special committees or bodies are, and then I took it that those ones where the community or bodies were represented. Council meetings under 321 I thought were specifically referable to council meetings. And that's why I thought that the Finance Committee wasn't included under 323, because it's not one that I didn't think that the public normally participates in the policy development and the functions of the council. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. The council committees are a list of some of the committees where the public can attend and have input. I think that maybe the Finance and Works could go under 3.2.1 as a separate paragraph rather than 323.
Madam Chair, would it be appropriate if we change the title of 3.2.1 to whole of council meetings and committees?
I'll defer to the General Manager for that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It'll be a simple reprint by including committees of the whole of council, including the Works and Finance, as a separate component of that, and then that fixes the anomaly that's been raised, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Jam. Any other? Councillor McCarthy.
What about the TAL committee in 323 as well?
Which one, sorry, Councillor?
TAL committee, traffic committee.
Traffic committee.
Yeah, in 323.
Yeah.
That's where I think
that's a statutory committee. I don't know that it would go into members of the public personally participating in policy development. I don't think that would come under 323.
Oh well, put it up in 321.
Advice.
Sorry.
Through the chair, TALC is an advisory committee of council that gives that buy-in. Like, there are members of the council. I believe it probably does sit in that council committees section of the guide. So I might more than happy to include TALC.
Thank you. Were there any other comments, councillors? If not, I'm going to put the recommendation that the Agency Information Guide 2020-21 be adopted as presented in this report with those additions. All in favour? Carried, thank you. Page 29.
Can you hear me?
Sorry?
Lynette, can you hear me?
Yes, Councillor Donny, I can hear you. Councillor Donny's muted. I can't hear what he's saying. Councillor Donny, I can hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
That's good. Sorry, I've just been having a few computer problems. I think I'm all right now. Thanks very much for your patience.
Thank you, Councillor. Page 29, councillors. Item 0402, CTA Audit and Risk Improvement Committee. There's a recommendation in 3 parts that the report item 0402 be received as information, noting the minutes from the Central Tablelands Alliance Audit and Risk Improvement Committee meetings held on the 17th of March 2020. That Philip Ross be appointed as the 3rd independent member of the Central Tablelands Alliance Audit and Risk Improvement Committee, and that the amended Central Tablelands Alliance Audit and Risk Improvement Committee charter be adopted. Can I have someone to move those 3 recommendations, councillors? Councillor Kellam, thank you. A seconder, councillors, please. Councillor McCarthy, thank you. Councillor Kellam, do you wish to speak to the recommendation?
Just briefly, Madam Mayor, the new independent member, we did the selection panel about 10 days ago. Mr. Ross is an extraordinarily well qualified member. He has a doctorate in accounting, amongst other things, and has served on audit committees large and small for some significant time. One other candidate was also almost as well qualified, and there was a little bit of a toss-up for a while between the two, but Mr. Ross won out. The charter is a few amendments to the original charter to allow for the extra members and other administrative, minor administrative changes.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCarthy, do you wish to speak?
No, it's a straightforward report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments on this one, councillors, please? Councillor McKibben.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, I was wondering if we've had any further feedback on our submission in relation to the internal audit committees and the government's, New South Wales government's response. That's number one. And number two, currently with the independent members, what is it going to cost Oberon per year with the current arrangements?
Thank you, Councillor. As for the first one of your points, we have not yet received any response to the submission. I think that there were more submissions entered than they anticipated, and it's taking some time. I would have to defer to the General Manager for the second part of your question, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Current budget allocation is $25,000 that covers Oberon Council's component of the total ARIC committee, unless my Corporate Services Director would like to state otherwise.
No, that's correct.
Thank you. Is that it, Councillor McKibben? Any other comments, councillors? I'm going to put the recommendation in three parts. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Page 53, councillors, item 0403, COVID-19 update. There's a recommendation, councillors, in four parts, that the report item 0403 be received as information and the actions taken to date be noted. That businesses who pay council rent/lease be offered an option for a deferral of payments for 6 months in accordance with the COVID-19 stimulus package announced by the federal government should they apply. Point 3, that the 7.5% interest rate charged on overdue rates be waived for ratepayers who fall behind in rates and/or water sewer charges due to the loss of income as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that council consider any rate levy assistance as part of its 2020-21 operational plan. Can I have a mover for those recommendations, please? Councillors. Councillor Kellam and Councillor McKibben, thank you. Councillor Kellam, would you like to speak to this report?
Madam Mayor, the item 2, there are several businesses that pay us lease fees, and it is entirely appropriate that we act in accordance with the federal government's direction in terms of relief for that. And I equally agree that deferring interest rate for people who fall behind in their rates or water and sewage charges is equally as reasonable. And we need to consider rate levy assistance as part of the operational plan, because we need to make sure we have an appropriate income and have to understand clearly what changes to our income this will cause, so that we have a budget that fits our resources.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McKibben, do you wish to speak to this report? Yep. Councillor McKibben.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. While in principle I agree with each of the four recommendations, questions. I am just wondering, with a lot of these things, how we're objectively going to assess some of these things, because some businesses are obviously being affected a lot more by COVID-19 than others. And in respect to the 7.5% interest rate, how are we there are certain businesses that will probably be clear there's be a loss of income as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, because they are businesses that have either had to close, or if their restaurants or cafes can only do takeaway, and it's reasonably objective to see. I'm just wondering if we have how we're going to assess the criteria in relation to, in particular, 3. And again, are all the businesses who rent from council going to be equally affected in respect to the COVID-19, or some may remain basically unaffected? Have we, as the General Manager, thought as to how we can assess these objectively?
To go to the General Manager, thank you.
Through the Mayor, I'm happy to defer to our Corporate Services Director to update on how that proposal would be considered, because it certainly has been considered.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In relation to number 3, the 7.5% interest rate charge will be dealt with on through the hardship policy, on a case by case. So it's not only for businesses, it's for all ratepayers. In relation to number 2, yes, there will be some businesses that are dealt with that can deal with this COVID better than others, but it will be once again on a case by case basis.
And we do that now under our hardship policy. So the structure is in place.
Through the Chair, number 2 has another adjunct to that, and it is, should they apply for the federal funding? So there is another requirement for those users. So they don't have to. It's just a secondary measure. Hence the reason why we put should they apply at the back of the second recommendation.
Thank you. Anyone else before I go back to Councillor McKibben? Councillor McCarthy?
Yes, Madam Mayor, with number 3, shouldn't there be a starting date for this? What if someone's already behind?
Madam Mayor, through you, this was considered, and it clearly states that it will be dealt with if it is due to the COVID. Doesn't matter whether it was when it first started or whether it's now. It will be as a result of the COVID. It is not for ratepayers who have been affected by the drought or the bushfires, etc. in previously. This will be dealt with through the operational plan and the assessment of how we can assist ratepayers in the future, moving forward.
Considering that we didn't do anything for the drought, and I know it's green, but there's still a lot of people hurting, I just think there should be a starting date of this, say end of February. That's my concern. And one of the businesses is my concern that I thought was applying. They have a house thrown in with their lease, and I think the cost of the house is what the lease is per week, isn't it? If you were renting a house over town, the cost of the lease of this council function is half of what you'd be paying for a rental house.
As this is being dealt with on a case-by-case basis, Councillor McCarthy, I'm sure that this will be taken up into consideration by the Director. Am I correct?
That is correct. With regard to the date, I'm happy to be guided by Council for point 3.
Okay. I'm to be guided by councillors? Councillors? Councillor McCarthy?
Well, I personally think it should have a starting date, because then it takes it away from the staff that someone comes along and, oh, well, pleading in their handkerchief, but they were able to fulfil their thing. I understand the businesses are shut down, that's totally different. But I think there should be a starting date of, say, end of February or something like that.
You want to raise an amendment, councillor?
No, I'm just putting it out there to see the two movers might change it.
I'll go back to councillor Kellam as the mover.
I think I have no inherent objection to having a date put in there, but we have already talked about a case-by-case basis on this. In this case, on number 2, is that there are only a couple of organisations that lease property from the council, and that is not difficult to deal with.
Councillor McKibben, as a seconder.
Look, thank you, Madam Mayor. I sort of tend to agree with Councillor Kellam. I think there's only two businesses or 3 basically we're dealing with, and it's going to be dealt with similar to hardship. And as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a deferral for 6 months, and is it then have to be paid after 6 months, or is the federal government reimbursing for that 6 months? That's what I'm not clear. I thought the federal government was reimbursing for some of the rental. Whether it's private, whoever it's rental.
That is why we put the last bit on that recommendation. It is a deferral, and they would have to pay it through either a payment plan or catch up, unless they apply for the government subsidy and they achieve a reimbursement for that.
That's what I thought, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on this one then, councillors? Councillor McKibben. Councillor McKibben. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A different issue. I'm just wondering, from a budgetary point of view, if we have made any estimate or looked at a budget as to what we think the ambit of these 4 recommendations could possibly cost council, or a range, so that we have some idea.
I would think that would be quite difficult, because we don't really know the volume of applications, or whether there'd be 1 or whether there'd be 50. I'm sure that maybe when the operational plan gets put together, we might get a better idea.
Madam Chair, I have deferred from putting dollar figures in here, as this is not being discussed as a confidential matter, and we will address it as part of the operational plan with some estimates for the COVID funding.
Thank you. Councillor McKibben.
I mean, I support the 4 recommendations. I've said the only problem with is that I think it's prudent on councillors to at least be aware of what it might cost us before we actually approve these recommendations. I mean, I think we sort of can't write a blank check. We should have at least an indication of the possible financial parameters we're talking about here. I just, you know, if we approve these recommendations, which I believe should be, but I think we should have some idea of what financially the impact's going to be. I realise that it will only be an estimate at best, but I think we should at least have an estimate. I understand that that may be confidential, but I just feel that councillors should be made aware of it before we approve it.
Can I ask through the General Manager, is there an estimate if we defer this into confidential at this point in time? Is there an estimate at this point in time, or not?
Through the chair, it's completely subjective, because some of the ratepayers mightn't apply for it. Like, it's very difficult for us to give an estimate. I'm happy to defer to our corporate services director if they have some undertaking. We are certainly looking at COVID budgeting for 2021, but to give an estimate for the remainder of 1920 is difficult. But
Okay.
I'm happy to defer to Lynette to provide any other information.
Thank you. Is there any other information you can provide, Director?
Madam Mayor, not in an open meeting. I'm not prepared to put a figure on that at this point in time.
Okay.
If there is concern, perhaps number 2 might want to be deferred to the June meeting when we are discussing the operational plan.
Okay, there's the options there. That would require an amendment to take out number 2 and defer it to the operational plan discussions, which will happen in June. If there is an amendment to be raised, is there someone to raise it? Councillor Donny, are you raising an amendment? Councillor
No,
Donny?
Madam Mayor, I'm trying to make a comment.
Okay, yep.
I'm just clarification. Where it says deferral of payments for people who may have suffered loss of income, I mean, this is going to cover both businesses and private individuals, I assume.
Mm-hmm.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking I appreciate Councillor McKibben's point, but I find that extremely hard to estimate as to, we're talking about hospitality workers, we're talking about all sorts of people. I find it really difficult as how we would estimate the cost of this venture at this point. If my understanding is correct, that it is both commercial and individual. Can I clarify that?
Madam Mayor, if I could please clarify, is Councillor Donny talking about number 2 or number 3?
Number 3.
Number 3.
Number 3, I could probably clarify that for number 3, I'm happy to do that because the 7.5 interest rates charged on overdue rates is well under $500. It's not a huge amount. It is basically deferring the imposement of that interest rate while they have until they make their rate payments, and that is what we're deferring in point 3. It is not the deferral of the actual rates, it's the deferral of the interest rate on those late fees.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Waived on item 3, doesn't it say that they'd be waived? In other words, they don't have to pay it?
The interest rates will be waived.
That is correct, yes.
Interest rate would be waived, the interest component.
Not the rates.
Not the rates, I understand that.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is the COVID that we're dealing with, COVID-19 update, it started in February, didn't it? Yeah, end of February.
Right.
It impacted on us.
Right.
Well, if someone comes to council and then they say, I've had it impacted since October, that's all I'm saying, that there should be a date to start it.
I think this was where the case-by-case basis assessment will come in, Councillor.
Okay, I'm just not happy with it anyway. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, councillors, before I put this recommendation? Councillor Gibbons. Councillor Gibbons. We're not hearing you, Councillor Gibbons. Just one moment.
Councillor Gibbons, could you please unmute yourself down in the bottom menu? It's not allowing me to do it from here, I apologise. There'll be a picture of a speaker with a line through it. If you just select that, please. I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, I cannot unmute. Oh, there you go, Councillor Gibbons.
Can you
Can
hear
you
us?
hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, councillor.
Yeah, I just feel for considering trying to estimate budgets and that. I'm a bit inclined to agree with Councillor McCarthy. If there was a starting date where the lockdown began, or where, particularly that's for businesses where they started to go downhill, and it's affected just about everyone up in the main street. So I don't know whether that's a consideration to try and have some sort of a finger on the pulse with regards to business and a budget.
Thank you, councillor. Well, I have asked the mover and seconder if they wish to change their recommendation or accept that as part of the recommendation, and they were not. So it would take an amendment, councillors. Is there someone that wants to move an amendment to get this up? Councillor Kellam.
Madam Mayor, the only amendment I would suggest is that we do defer point 2 to the May meeting, noting it is only 2 businesses we're talking about, which would leave the recommendation as item 1, currently item 3 and 4. And I'd also note that as far as budgeting for deferred rates and the 7.5% surcharge goes, you can't possibly understand how many people are not going to pay. And it's not money we're losing, it's money we are simply choosing not to levy. So it won't significantly affect the council's budget, and it will aid a number of people significantly.
Thank you, councillor. So is there somebody moving any amendment here, councillors? If not, I'm going to put the recommendation as it sits. I'm putting the recommendation in 4 parts, councillors. All in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. There are no closed session reports this evening, councillors. We're on page 64. Is there any general business? Councillor McCarthy.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I have a couple. Are we still looking forward to a balanced budget at the end of the financial year, where we had the projected $2,000 surplus?
Through the General Manager.
I'll defer to the Director of Corporate.
Madam Mayor, we are currently assessing the Q3 budget review as we speak. I do not have that finalised, but it will be finalised in time for the May meeting, and it will be presented at that meeting. We are anticipating a balanced budget, but we cannot guarantee it with the extra expenditure that has been spent on COVID, but we haven't finalised that report.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy, is that?
Return on our investment for the rental houses. One's been sitting there vacant since Christmas. I remember Andrew McKibben saying that it was a good investment, but it's not good unless the houses are full.
Through the General Manager.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, as council will also be aware, is that we've just gone through a recruitment for a director. The house was initially indicated by the successful applicant that they were going to take that house. Since that point, they have now decided to go somewhere else, and that house is being put on the market as we speak.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor? Councillor McCarthy.
Thought on the interview the person opted to go somewhere else from the word scratch, but anyway, I'll be taking on those. Did we sell the new slasher that replaced the mower when it was breaking down? It was a significant amount of money to go and buy a new slasher while the mower was broken down. So where's the new slasher? Has it been sold or sitting in a shed with no tractor to drive it?
Through the General Manager.
The Tech Services Director.
Yeah, through the chair. Certainly, we have both pieces of equipment available to us. We had the mower component, and we had to purchase a slasher. So we have both still at our beck and call.
Okay, thank you. And the last one is, where'd the $40,000 end up from the scrap metal from last financial year? Wouldn't it be enough money to finish that office that's out at the tip? This would be to the General Manager.
Yep. To the General Manager.
I could defer to the 40,000 to the Director. However, the money for the relocation of the pound has been allocated for within the current waste budget. So it's there. I'll defer to the Corporate Services Director about the scrap metal.
The scrap metal money has been returned into the waste fund. Excuse me.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy, is that it?
When's the projects at the tip going to be completed then?
To the General Manager?
Through the chair, our current Director is looking at those projects as we speak.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy, is that it for you?
Oh, well, I'm not happy with the explanation, but anyway, I'll have to sit on it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other general business today? Councillor McKibben.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I thought last time we looked at the budget, we were actually looking at a small deficit at the end of the year. Therefore, I'm a little. The comments thus far are we're now looking at a small surplus, because the last time I thought we looked at it, it was acknowledged there was likely to be a small deficit.
Through the Director.
Madam Mayor, that is correct, Councillor McKibben. We were anticipating a small deficit. We did say at the time that we were confident that we could bring that back, and that will depend on the work that we have obtained to do that during that period.
The external work, you mean?
That is correct.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Is there no other general business? I'm going to close the meeting at 6:15. Thank you, councillors.